So I've used the Lumix S5 for nearly a year now, and I thought I'd talk a little bit about why I think the Lumix S5 might be a better option for you compared to the Lumix S5 II, especially if you're a beginner and have a limited budget. So just a little disclaimer, I haven't actually used the Lumix S5 II, so everything I'm talking about now will be about why I decided to buy the S5 compared to the S5 II. So I won't be comparing images or anything like that. All of the footage I'm showing is from the S5. And the whole point of this video is to compare the specs of the different cameras and kind of see if it's worth it to actually buy the S5 II compared to the S5 if you consider all the extra features you're getting with the S5 II, and to see if you actually need those features. And I think in some ways the S5 is actually better than S5 II. And the first thing is the price. If you buy the S5 used, you can get the camera for around $700 or $800 and you can get the S5 II for around $1,200. So I think on average there's around a $400 difference between the two cameras. If you consider the price of the Lumix S5 used, $700 to $800, I think personally that's one of the best deals you can get for a camera right now. It has 4K, shoots in full frame, has a pretty decent dynamic range, and I think the main thing I really love about the Lumix S5 is the IBIS. Everything I shot with the Lumix S5, I've shot it handheld. I haven't had to rig out the camera at all, and you don't have to worry about micro jitters or anything like that. So obviously, if you look at the Lumix S5 compared to Lumix S5 II, the Lumix S5 II is around 30% more expensive than Lumix S5. So then what we should figure out, is it actually worth it for you to buy the Lumix S5 II compared to Lumix S5? And then over to image quality, a lot of Panasonic cameras are known for being quite over-sharpened, and that's actually including the Lumix S5 II. They're known for having quite a digital look. However, the Lumix S5 is not as over-sharpened compared to the Lumix S5. It has a little bit of a softer image, and I think it has a little less of a digital look. At least that's what I've seen from other YouTube videos and people talking about the different cameras. And the reason why the Lumix S5 II is a little bit more sharpened, I think has a little bit to do with the improved autofocus. So some people will say that the Lumix S5 has a better image than the Lumix S5, especially if you consider the sharpening. And the Lumix S5 has some moire issues. It doesn't have a OLP filter. I've had some issues with the Lumix S5 where the image wasn't as usable because of patterns on the wall or because of clothing and stuff like that. And I've heard that with the Lumix S5 II, that's even more of an issue. And over to rolling shutter, the Lumix S5 also has a little bit of a better readout speed compared to the Lumix S5 II. The Lumix S5 has a readout speed of 21 milliseconds, according to Cinedy, and the Lumix S5 II has a readout speed of around 22 milliseconds, according to Cinedy. And this is in full frame mode. And obviously, this is not a big difference at all. You really wouldn't be able to tell the difference. But it is interesting that the cheaper camera has a little bit of a better readout speed compared to the more expensive version. And actually, if you're shooting in APS-C mode and you're cropping the sensor, the Lumix S5 has a readout speed of around 12 milliseconds. And then the Lumix S5 II actually has a readout speed of 14 milliseconds. And if you change the frame rate of the Lumix S5 to 50 milliseconds, you get a readout speed of around 10 milliseconds. And if you do the same with the Lumix S5 II, the readout speed won't change. It would still be 14 milliseconds. So if you're shooting APS-C mode, the Lumix S5 actually has a significantly better readout speed compared to the Lumix S5 II. So if you have a lot of APS-C lenses and you want to use them with the Lumix S5 or the Lumix S5 II, then the Lumix S5 might be a better option. And if you compare the dynamic range of the two cameras, I think the Lumix S5 II has a little bit of a better dynamic range compared to the S5. But I think both of them are around 12 to 13 stops of dynamic range. But there is one part of the Lumix S5 II where the image quality might be a little better, depending on who you ask. And that is resolution. One of the reasons why you might want to buy the Lumix S5 II is because it can shoot in 6K and it can also shoot in open gate. And if you compare that to the Lumix S5, it can only shoot in 4K and it only shoots in 16:9. So you don't get the open gate. So you obviously can get more resolution out of the Lumix S5 II. And if you're shooting social media and you need to have a vertical delivery for social media and stuff, then the open gate can be quite handy, or if you're shooting anamorphic. However, the 6K open gate you're getting from the Lumix S5 II is only in 10-bit 420. You do not get it in 10-bit 422. So even though it has more resolution, It has a little bit less color depth compared to the 422 you're getting from the 4K from both the S5 and S5 II. So in the color grade, you'll have more to work with the 4K 422 rather than the 6K. For me, the reason why I don't really worry about the 6K or the open gate is because personally I don't really need it. One of the main draws of the Lumix S5 is the 422 10-bit 4K H.264. And the reason for that is because you're getting more than enough quality, in my opinion, but you're still getting quite small file sizes at around 150 megabytes per second. So I'm saving quite a lot of money on storage when I'm having these small file sizes when using the Lumix S5. Compared to Lumix S5 II, if you use the 6K OpenGate, you'll have to spend more money on storage. So for me, when looking at the Lumix S5, it's more important for me to have a less sharpened image that looks less clinical and less digital and more cinematic, and then maybe have a little bit less resolution compared to the Lumix S5 II, where you're getting more resolution, but it looks more digital, clinical, and is a little bit too sharpened. And then over to the autofocus. The Lumix S5 is quite known for having pretty bad autofocus, and one of the main things that the Lumix S5 II improves is the autofocus. From what I've seen, the Lumix S5 II has a significantly better autofocus and is much more usable. From what I've seen from the Lumix S5 is that there's pretty much no point in using the autofocus, especially if you compare it to other cameras like the Sony FX3 and other similar cameras. But for me personally, I don't really use autofocus. Most of the lenses that I use don't have autofocus. They are cine lenses. So personally, it's really a non-issue. And it's definitely not worth spending the extra money to get it. But if you're a person who really relies on autofocus and who needs it for their work, then it might be worth it to pay the price difference for the autofocus. But again, as mentioned earlier, with the Lumix S5 II, one of the reasons why the autofocus works better is because of the sharpened image, at least from what I understand. So then you're prioritizing autofocus over image quality. I also think that the Lumix S5 II has a cooling system, but when using the Lumix S5, and I used it on feature films, and I've used it on days on end in the summer, I've never had heating issues with the Lumix S5. So I think those are the main differences between the Lumix S5 and the Lumix S5 II, and then it's up to you to consider if it's worth paying that extra money to get all the features that the Lumix S5 II offers. But I do want to do a little bit of a thought experiment. Because let's say you end up buying the Lumix S5 and you end up saving $400. What can you spend that money on instead? Obviously, one of the first things you need to buy is a lens. And for $168, you can get the TT Artisan 40mm f2. This is a lens that I got sent recently, and I've been really surprised by this lens. I think it has a really nice vintage quality to it. It's very small, it's easy to bring with you. And since this is a 40mm on a full-frame sensor, I think this is a great all-rounder lens that you can use for pretty much anything. You can use it for close-ups, you can use it for wide shots, you can use it for medium shots. It's just a really versatile lens. If you think this lens looks nice, I actually have an affiliate link in the bio. So then you spend the money on the TT Artisan 40mm, but you still have around $240 left to spend on other things. So what you can do then is buy a tripod, for example, for around $200. I use a pretty cheap Benro tripod that I've been using for all of my YouTube videos. And it works great with the Lumix S5 since it's so small. And it works perfectly, especially for YouTube videos. So instead of buying the Lumix S5 II, you now have the Lumix S5 and a lens and a tripod. So now you're actually ready to start shooting. Then obviously you have to buy a SD card, but that only costs around $50 or maybe even less than that. Let's say you already have a lens and already have a tripod and you want good sound. Then instead you can buy a Panasonic XLR module that you can put on the camera. And then you can buy a used microphone for around $100. Like this Sennheiser microphone that I'm using, then suddenly you have great sound for your videos. Or you can just pocket the $400 and you can spend it on something completely different. For example, the MacBook Pro that I'm using, I bought that used for around $500. So you can actually end up buying a laptop, for example, for the money you end up saving by not buying the Lumix S5 II. So is the Lumix S5 better than the S5 II? In most cases, it's not. But I think if you're looking at price, and if you look at what you can get practically with the money you end up saving, and if you just look at the features that the Lumix S5 already offers, especially when it comes to image quality, I think that the Lumix S5 is more than good enough. And I would also challenge people when looking at cameras that you don't always need to buy the most expensive version or the newest version. You need to look at the specific features that each camera brings and see if you actually need those features. For example, with the Lumix S5 II, if you don't need autofocus and you don't need 6K or OpenGate, I don't really see the point in spending the extra money on that camera instead of buying the Lumix S5. So that is really my main point of this video, is to really consider these things when buying a camera. So it's really about being smart with your money and not always going for the newest, most shiniest thing just because it has the most features. Because oftentimes you might not really need all those features. I hope the title wasn't too clickbaity. And I do hope I made my point clear about, being conscious about the way you spend your money on cameras. And I hope this video was useful, and I'll see you guys in the next one.